who is going to give her talk that's called Consent.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Emma Holten, and I work mainly in the area of revenge porn and consent violations online, but that's not specifically what we're going to talk about today. I thought it was more relevant in this context to talk about what I do a lot, which is to kind of attempt to make regular people care about internet rights. I guess this is an area that a lot of you are engaged in, and it is my experience that a lot of us are having extreme difficulty getting people who are not directly involved with tech or IT to genuinely care and understand why this is important, why stuff like surveillance is important, or why stuff like consent violations is important, because they have a sense that it's somehow not relevant to them. Can you hear me even though it's windy? Okay, great. So what I'm going to talk about today is because I'm a humanist. I'm from the humanities, and what I do is I analyze. So what we're going to talk about today is the language and the way that we cast these issues, the words that we use to describe what it is that we work with, and the words that we use to describe why it is that we find these things to be so important. Because in working with this, I've had some insights into why people think that it's not relevant to them. So this is what we're going to talk about. I'm guessing that you probably all know this mask. I didn't bring it, but it was here already, so I'm thinking that you all know the symbolism of what this means. You've seen it a million times, and I suppose that to a lot of us, this mask has come to kind of represent a lot of the things that we as internet activists are passionate about, which is, you know, like the story of the little guys standing up to the big corporations and standing up to multinationals, and, you know, just using our ability to be smarter than them and better than them at what they do and to subvert their power. And the thing that this mask also symbolizes is anonymity. We have this idea of this movement that is kind of faceless, right? It could be basically anyone wearing the mask. It could be a woman, it could be a person of color, it could be a trans person, it could be a man, whatever. We can all be anonymous. That is kind of the basic premise of the movement, and it's the basic premise of the WikiLeaks movement as well. A lot of the open source movements have the anonymity thing as well. And this symbol, the mask or whatever, can kind of be attached to any deed. Sometimes it's attached to fantastic things, and as we all know, sometimes it's attached to things that we don't necessarily support as a movement or as a group or even as individuals. But I can really understand why there is a certain appeal to this, that this like vigilante hacktivist who uses his brains to outsmart people who are much richer than him, much bigger than him, who have much more power. And we're enthralled by this idea. It's a David and Goliath story, right? It's the little guy sitting in his basement, and he's just really good at his computer, and just using his computer, he can subvert these immense powers that otherwise would try to control us. And I think that we all observe, especially people who are at things like this, a society around us that is trying to subvert and attack our civil rights. Whether it is through government surveillance or through market surveillance, I think we're all kind of observing a movement where we feel like there is a disintegration of our rights. And what we're trying to do is we have these anonymous movements, and we are kind of loosely attached to them, but we also kind of support them because we feel that they are the response that we're giving to this violence that is being done against us. And I think that that analysis is true. And I think that every one of us who has spent like even 5 minutes on the internet will know that it is not the democratic place that it was once heralded to be in its very dawn. It has not become this necessarily democratic revolutionary place. It is a place where people are silenced, people are committed violence against, entire movements are silenced. Palestine is being removed from Google Maps. There are all sorts of things and all sorts of instances where we see traditional forms of power being reproduced online. The internet did not become this place where the smartest guy always wins. Sometimes money wins, and sometimes power that exists in the real world also wins online. logic doesn't win, the right and wrong doesn't win. Sometimes wrong wins. I think we are all pretty aware of that. So I don't think it's that odd that we need something to rally around. We're observing an injustice, and then we're trying to do better. We're trying to attempt to criticize it, to attack it from different places. We do it with words, we do it with technology. And we want to feel mobilized by something. I think it's a pretty basic human need to want to be in a movement. You see injustice and you want to be with people who share the observation of this injustice, and you want to work with them and learn from each other and understand what can we do to make this not happen. And we want this, and I think this is very important in terms of the anonymous clause or the anonymous ideal, is that we want our movement to be leaderless. In the internet movement, or what you want to call it, the free internet movement, there is this extreme hatred of hierarchy. There is this extreme hatred of the fact that some person should be the face of something, or some person should be their leader, or that there should be this specific ideology connected to what we do. But what that means is that what we end up doing is we need to have a very clear agreement on what is right and what is wrong. Because when you don't have a leader, you have to have some sort of moral compass. Otherwise, it's just everything goes to shambles and it isn't a movement. And we want it to be a movement that's kind of everywhere. We want it to be, you can't really grasp it. It can be anywhere. It could be anyone. It could be me. It could be any of you. And this is one of the central tenets of it. We have pretty strong demands. As soon as someone becomes a face of something, we kind of lose interest in it, right? We're like, fuck you. You don't decide how we think or what we do. So every time a person rises up and becomes a symbol of what it is that we care about, we tend to take some distance from them, which I think is healthy. But it also has consequences for how we organize ourselves and how we think. So yeah, this is kind of what we're working towards, I think, at least visually. So the reason that I'm standing here is that, and the reason that I care about stuff like this is that I was a victim of revenge porn in 2011. I don't know if I have to introduce the concept, but private material was stolen from me and published online without my consent. For me, it was my email, but it happens on computers, it happens on hard drives, it happens on mobile phones, any sort of place where you can have material, things can be stolen from. And this was then compiled into a torrent, along with my address, Google Street View pictures of my house, my Facebook friends list, pretty much any sort of information you can find of me online, along with an encouragement to harass and violate me. And I think it's very difficult to explain what this feels like to a person who hasn't experienced it, but it definitely doesn't feel like being anonymous anymore. What it does is that it creates this extreme focus on your person and every element of your person. And it is an extremely violent experience that you can't really escape. The thing with the internet is that, as we know, you can't escape it. It's everywhere. You're carrying your violation around in your pocket with you every single day. And this was in violation of Danish law, but as we all know, lawmakers and politicians aren't that interested in things that happen online, so nothing really came of the issue. There is a huge, digital ignorance. And to me, I think what was most surprising about this and how this is relevant to what we're talking about today is that I was very surprised at how gendered it was, what had happened to me. It was very specifically gendered. The violence that I faced was very specific to my gender. I very quickly realized that this type of violation is very heavily skewed towards one gender. And it felt like, even though it happened to me, it wasn't only about me. It was also about people who had a general hatred for people who look like me, or people who carried the same gender identity as me. And this felt, because I'd been aware of sexism online. I logged on to IRC when I was maybe 11 years old for the first time. I know that there are people online who hate women, but witnessing this, having people come to your home and throw stones at your window, and having people send material that they stole from you to your boss and to your family, it gives you a very acute awareness that there is such a thing as violence on the internet, and that it has very, very severe effects on your mental health, on your on the possibility to gain employment, on your social circle, on pretty much every aspect of your life. But yeah, I was very, and I may be naively surprised at the extreme joy that some people find in destroying other people's lives. This was not necessarily hateful so much as it was entertainment. My destruction was a form of entertainment. People just kind of, went on 4chan and just asked around for a few hours and, sent some rape threats to me, and then they logged off and did something else. It was just part of the way that they were online. Some guy even bought emmaholten.com to kind of optimize SEO for the pictures, so they would come out on top for sure, because he was noticing that I was kind of trying to get the pictures away. So, yeah, they want it to be bad. Let's put it like that. And it took about 3 years of living with this to understand that this was not a personal attack that had anything to do with me, that this was a much more structural issue that had to do with who has the power to be anonymous, who has the power to not be, and what happens after that power has been taken away. And especially, I came to realize, as I said before, that this was a very gendered type of violence, that it definitely was not unimportant that I was a young woman in these pictures. My age mattered, the nature of the picture mattered, my gender definitely mattered. And what I came to understand also was that my abuse was being sold as a product. That it was definitely very profitable to do these things to me and to have sites that made this possible. So for me, criticizing capitalism also became a very integral part of understanding what revenge porn is. That outlawing revenge porn is also having a very serious discussion about should people be allowed to make money off online. Because a lot of people were making kind of a lot of money off of me not having any basic rights. So I started working as an activist on this issue, and I don't know, does anyone remember the 4chan meme, there are no girls on the internet? Okay, some people are nodding. There are no girls on the internet is this it's very 4chan-y. There's this guy sitting with a teacup saying eat shit, and then there's a guy who writes, in the real world, being a girl has value. Like, you can make people buy shit for you, you can have people be nice to you because they want to fuck you. But online, it's not like that. There's no reason to say that you're a girl online other than wanting to get attention. And while this meme is really crude and, like I said, it's very 4chan-y, it has an element of truth to it, which is that as long as you're anonymous online, you're a man. I know this very, very well. People get very surprised once they find out you're a woman. You could hang out in chat rooms or on boards for years and years, and then suddenly they realize you're a woman, and it's like your whole demeanor changes. Everything you've ever said just means something completely different and comes from a completely different place. And I think this is important when we discuss what it is that the anonymous movements and the WikiLeaks movements and our obsession with anonymity means. So, who is it that we're talking about when we're talking about the user? Who is this person? And who is the person we're talking about when we're talking about who's behind this? And it made me feel like that in the internet movement in general, there was really not a space for me talking about the gendered experience of having an experience of internet harassment. And to me, I was not just a regular person or whoever. It wasn't someone wearing this mask who was a victim of revenge porn. It was me. And it was me as a young woman. It was me living in Copenhagen. It was me having all these types of experiences. But it was also me having the extreme privilege of having a college education or having the means to do activism on this issue. I was not just any person. And that kind of opened up some issues to me in how it is that we talk about this. Because we have this idea that the faceless person is the brave person, right? That if you need to be public with your identity or your person, it's because your hacking skills or your skills in coding aren't enough to speak for themselves. Like, why would you want to need to be a person? Because I can be moot all day long, and I don't need to be a person. Everyone knows me anyway because I'm just so important. And that just wasn't a privilege that was given to me. I was very specifically gendered, and I will be gendered for the rest of my life. And I think that I've been left with a sense that we have an issue dealing with what happened to me in this community, because it is so specifically gendered and so heavily geared towards a specific group in the population. Because this faceless vigilante ideal erases a lot of difference. And it erases a lot of different vulnerabilities in society. Another example is how poor people especially are victims of surveillance, much more so than rich people are. And I think that this is also an issue that is kind of not talked about so much, that some people are hit specifically much, much more than others by internet violence and by cybercrime or by general violations of their civil rights. And I feel that also when I want to talk about this issue, I am always in this movement forced to kind of make it relevant to everybody. I'm forced to kind of translate it into how it would look if it were to happen to a man. And I can understand that. I think it's very relevant that we make general points, but also maybe it just is more relevant to women to talk about this specific issue, and that should not make it less relevant to the movement as a whole. And I've met extreme resistance to this way of thinking, to the way of introducing identity politics into the internet movement has been very, very difficult. And it continues to be difficult because we have this ideal of everyone being the same, and of right and wrong being the same to everybody, and what's important and what's not important should be the same for everybody. And I think when we have this ideal and this way of speaking about internet rights, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're making a huge mistake, because what we're erasing is why privacy is important. And that is because no one is the same. We wouldn't need privacy if everyone was the same. If everyone looked like this, it wouldn't matter. But they don't. The reason people need privacy is because we're not the same. Bodies matter, your life matters, your experience matters, what had happened to you matters, your socioeconomic status matters, your income matters, your gender matters, your sexuality matters. If you're a trans person, it matters a great deal. What private information, what information can be found about you online and what can't. It's basically, will you get harassed or not? Another example is LGBTQ. Young people in Canada, a recent survey showed that LGBTQ people are victims of 4 times as much harassment online than their heterosexual peers, which shows that identity does matter. We're not this anonymous movement of like Barbie and Ken bodies fighting together. It matters what we care about. Yeah, so while I might want to be anonymous sometimes, and I have anonymous accounts on many, many platforms, none of us are all of it the time. And I think we have neglected in this movement to talk about the times when we are not anonymous, the times when we very specifically are us. And I think that communicating this, it is that moment when we very specifically become us that we start needing privacy for real. That when we really start noticing how we are different from others and how other people view us, that is when privacy actually matters. Sorry. And I think this might be kind of at the crux of why we're having such difficulty communicating this to people, because we're not reminding them of what makes them different. We're reminding them that we're all the same. We're always reminding them that everything is that there is such a thing as right and wrong, and there is such a thing as evil and good, and that is relevant to everybody, and that means the same to everybody. And while I think that anonymous and the anonymous ideal, the movement ideal, the non-hierarchical thinking, all these ideals that we have are extremely noble and very, very important. I think it's also time that we start kind of critically engaging with what are the actual consequences of our activism when we think about what it means to be a human being in in that way. Because what happens when people start wearing this mask, or when when their head is a question mark, is that a question mark doesn't have privacy. A question mark can't consent to what they think is embarrassing, or what they think is shameful, or what they want to keep private. It's dehumanizing. And what consent is, and what I realized, was that what happened to me was very specifically a human violation. It might have happened through technology, and it might have been aided by technology, but it was very, very human what happened to me. And it was very violent because it violated me as a human being. And while some people might think that having pictures leaked is not so bad, I did. I really did. And I couldn't get over it, and I can't get over it today. And that's just who I am. And we can't make a general rule about how bad it is to have pictures leaked. The only thing we can do is engage with the individual and ask, what is private to you? Because I think we've put an extreme distance between how we talk about these things, we talk about the general humanity, and how people experience their own lives, and how people experience what privacy means to them. Because what I've found out when I talk to regular people who don't talk that much about internet rights in general is that private information doesn't mean anything. It's a stupid concept, because there is no general rule for what private information is. What's important is that we realize that private information is different for everybody. And I think in the way that we communicate this, we have kind of given people the impression that there is a general agreement of what private information is. And when governments or multinationals take this private information, they know what they're doing. That they know that it's wrong and it's bad, and that we can criticize them for that. But what I'm observing has happened is much more that what private information means has changed. It has no meaning anymore. I think what many people would consider private information 15 years ago, Coca-Cola doesn't consider private information at all. Where you are at any given point in time, what you buy at every given point in time, all these things you know. But if we continue to use the concept private information, we kind of convey the fact that there is a standard global normative agreement about what private information is. And I think this conception of private information has the same consequence as the mask. It makes us sound as if we're all the same. That it's the same things that we're ashamed of, that it's the same things we want to keep secret, that it's the same things we want to keep to ourselves. And it's not. It's extremely, extremely different. Some people, you all know this, I'm guessing that some people in your friend group think that some of y'all are paranoid because you don't want to, use mobile pay, or you don't want to log on to your Gmail account on your Google Maps. And some of your friends are like, whatever, man, I don't care. Like, they can know that about me. There's nothing important about me. And I think if the internet has shown us anything, is that it is extremely different how we can consider privacy, what we consider private, and why we think these things are important. We're not all the same. We're not all Guy Fawkes. We have different limits. And the thing that new legislation that violates us is doing is that it's attempting to say, no, you all have to have the same limit. We have these discussions, and people are like, yeah, they can maybe film me on the street, but I don't want to be filmed at home. Or, they can record my phone conversations, but I don't want them to see my medical journals. We're all the time, even in the debates, we're trying to set these limits that is supposed to apply to everybody. And the thing is that those limits don't exist. I have nude pictures on my email, so the email is off limits for me. If someone only uses their email for stupid work stuff, maybe the email doesn't matter that much to them. But it matters to me, because I use it differently. And I think we're losing this concept. And for me, obviously, as you can see, the concept is consent. Is the individual right to consent in every instance. And I think that is what has been so drastically removed in the past 10 or 15 years, is that so many things are just kind of, the baby just thrown out with the bathwater, right? That if you want to be a citizen in Denmark, you have to give up so many things, so many privacy rights. You don't have a right to individually consent to everything. And when we attempt to make this normative ideal, what happens, of course, is that it's vulnerable people who are the most hit. It's people who have something to hide, who are the most hit by making normative standards for what is private and what is not. But maybe the world will go under, so it won't matter. And that's what I'm observing right now, is that what is missing in these movements and what is missing in our conversations are the people who are made very, very vulnerable, because they're told that if you need to talk about your identity, you're making yourself less important. If you can't be under the anonymous umbrella, if you want to talk specifically about poverty and your experience of poverty, or you want to talk specifically about your experiences with racism, or if you want to talk specifically about your gendered experience, you're kind of excluded a little. It's kind of made less relevant. It's kind of made as if it doesn't matter to everyone. And if it doesn't matter to everyone, a lot of people feel that it doesn't matter to anyone. And I think that, and a lot of people working in tech will maybe feel that this is very humanistic, but it's about the way we talk. It's about the words that we use, and it's about how we meet the critiques and how we meet the work that people do and the experience that people have. And I think we need to not be so afraid of introducing identity politics into our movement, because we need intersections of race and class, we need intersections of gender, if we truly want to understand how surveillance is hitting us and what it is that it's doing to our communities. And the anonymous movement is fantastic. I really love it. I think there are so many noble things, so many important things in it, but so many experiences are being erased because they can't, because so much of it doesn't happen under a mask. So I think, sorry, I'm a little quicker than I thought. Is that okay? Because I want to speak to you instead. So what I think could be an idea to what we could do instead is to kind of have as the basic premise that all information is private until you've decided that it isn't. I think right now we have a dialogue that is every information is public until you say, I don't want this public. And I think that if we recast the conversation in that light, I think people will have a much easier time understanding it. Because right now, it is my impression when I speak to people who are not regularly engaged in this, is that they have this idea that there is such a thing as private information, and that people are working to protect that. But when you start having them speak to each other about private information, it very quickly becomes obvious that they don't agree on what that means. And that in itself should be something for us as activists and people working in this area to kind of grab hold on and say, you know what, that guy doesn't think it's okay with medical journals, but you do. Don't you see that that's an issue? That we need to talk about how that shows that the system as it is right now is obviously not working, and that some people are getting heavily violated while some people aren't. And for some reason, as it always is, it seems to be that people who are very powerful don't get violated, while people who don't have any power seem to get violated a whole lot. And I think that we could take this mantle on us and continue to have this kind of David and Goliath ideal and say we still want to fight for people who are victimized. We still want to fight for people who are oppressed. We still want to be the voice of the little guy or the little girl or the little non-binary person and say, we fight for you. We realize your victimization in the system. We realize how you are wrongly and skewedly oppressed in this system, and we're working for you. And we're working for you with our skills, and we're working for you with our knowledge in this area, and understanding that you are much more heavily hit than the regular person. Because all in all, I think that the biggest challenge that we have, and the reason that I'm speaking on this subject today, is that once people hear about what's happening, and once they kind of truly grasp it and understand it, they are worried. They understand that there is an issue. But the scope of the issue and the technical knowledge it takes to understand this issue is so vast and so complex that we need to talk in a way that relates to how people see themselves as different from each other. That is my general experience. So when we talk about privacy, you remind people how they're different, not how they're alike. I think that is what I think about when I think about privacy. I think about all the things I do that not a lot of people do. And I think that is important. And I think that we've been too bad at that. Sorry, I'm kind of losing track here. So, like I said, the reason I need consent is because what's private to me is a lot more than what is private to a lot of other people. Because my situation has shifted now. Now I'm a public person, and I'm a feminist, and I'm all these things. I'm working with issues that are a little too much to handle for some people, and that has even changed how I view privacy. Now suddenly some things that I didn't consider private at all just a few years ago is tremendously important to me. Such as, how does it look inside my house? Or what are the names of my family members? Or where does my boyfriend live? Stuff like that I didn't really think about. And I think that this is an area, just to close off, that we will, as a movement, tremendously gain by understanding and employing the concept of privilege. Privilege is a concept that is used in feminism, and the good thing about privilege is that you don't notice when you have it, but once you lose it, you notice very, very quickly. And privilege is also what it feels like to feel that you have privacy. I spoke to a person a couple of weeks ago who is on kontanthjælp, which is kind of the basic income you get from the state in Denmark. If you're unemployed or very mentally or physically ill, it kind of helps you survive if you can't work. And I was talking to this person, and she said to me that what had mattered to her was that I had talked about what the state knows about our income. Because she had been completely shocked when she found out that not only does the state check her, her income from the state or her salary, they also check her account, her entire account. They've legally gained access to her entire bank account, every transaction, like every Snickers, everything. And she said to me that a couple of months ago, I wouldn't have found it violating, but now I do. Now I feel tremendously violated by the fact that they need to have access to this for me to get my money. And I think it's kind of this emotion we need to mobilize to make people feel why this matters. That if you have privacy, it's a privilege. It's something that you lose. It's a right that you lose. Privacy, as it is right now, is not a right. It's a privilege, and it's a very different concept, because people feel that rights is something that you don't lose in a civilized society, but privilege is something that you most definitely lose. And I think that we kind of need to employ this wording if we want people to understand that privacy isn't a right anymore. It stopped being a right a long time ago. It stopped being a right to me. It stopped being a right to that woman. It was a privilege to us, and we lost it. And that put us in a drastically different position than we were before. So kind of sum things up. We're not all alike. We're not anonymous. We're not a faceless movement. We're a movement of very, very different individuals with very different limits, with very different impressions of what is private and what is not. And instead of seeing this as a weakness that will split us up, we should see it as a strength in communicating why what we do is important. And I think if we do that, there are a lot of people left to be mobilized in this. There are a lot of people left who could care about this, who would understand why the internet is a democratic issue and not a tech issue. And I feel like I'm slowly getting to a point where I can talk to people about this in a way that seems everyday and mundane. And I think a lot of us are experiencing that, and I think we're going in a direction where people are going to care a lot more about this because it is getting a lot more attention. And if we talk about it a little different, if we remind people how they're different and what privacy doesn't mean, we're going to go a long way. Thank you. So I have some discussion questions, but I don't know if anyone has a question either way. Yeah. I think the question is, privacy is important, but doesn't privacy and anonymity, I guess you also mean, enable some of the violence that I've been a victim to? Yes. I think that this is maybe one of the biggest taboos in the anonymous movement, is that there is a basic paradox in the issue of revenge porn as such. There is the obvious issue that Anonymous and the movements that have kind of sprung out of Anonymous in some kind of way has this openness ideal that has this, lay everything on the table and it will set you free, right? I guess a lot of you will not be surprised that that is not my opinion about how I feel personally. But there is also the other thing, which is that I have to be honest with you, a lot of the people who did what they did to me did it anonymously and did it through Tor browsers and did it on the deep web. And we have yet to me at least, have an honest discussion about how we're going to talk about the people who use the tools that we call democratic liberation to violate others. I think that that is really taboo. For some reason, and I can understand why, because it kind of opens up Pandora's box. And I'm going to have to be honest with you, I don't have a solution for it. I wish I did, but I don't. I think it's one of the really important conversations that we need to have, which is if we accept the premise that there is such a thing as violence online, if we accept the premise that it has severe consequences for freedom of speech, for people, for democracy, then should we protect legally and culturally the people who violate others by using tools that we gave them? I don't know. What do you think? I think it's difficult. I think that there is so much value in anonymity. I think it's so important. I think it has that letting people talk privately has had, like the Arab Spring and the way that that was used is just one example. In the feminist movement, we use anonymity all the time because so many of us are targeted. But once you start using that anonymity for bad, and who decides what's bad? Do we? Does this guy? That's a paradox, and we have been very scared to talk about it because it needs to kind of intersect with an issue that we have in society in general, which is what is freedom of speech and should it be limited? And I'm not going to give you an answer to that. Yeah, down there. You're going to have to stand up. I don't want to hear you. I think... Okay, it's difficult to sum that up. Did you hear it? Okay, great. I think, first of all, we kind of need to challenge the dichotomy of either it's a democratic issue or it's a technical issue. I think tech is infrastructure. So when we talk about tech, we talk about, how does a voting booth work? How do we talk? How do we, tech is democracy. It's how we engage with each other. And I think that, I remember I was talking to a guy at Google who was kind of, it was very odd because it reminds me of this, because it was very obvious that he was in denial about algorithms being political, that he was completely in denial of that fact. And I said to him, but you know what? We all know, the best thing in the world, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? You do SEO about what people are interested in, and you have these, 52 algorithms that are secret that you don't want people to see. But I'm guessing it's about giving people what they want, right? And well, for 3 years, what people wanted about me was violation, it was violence, it was harassment, it was private information that they stole from me. And you gave it to them. You gave it to them right there as the first hit. Because you made an algorithm that made that possible. And I'm not saying that that algorithm is necessarily wrong. I'm saying that you have to stand up to the fact that that is the consequence of the way that your algorithm is made. And that has political consequences for me. As a person in the real world, as a person using the internet, you did that. You helped people do that. And it seemed to me that he kind of was in the algorithms are objective, rational things camp. And I think that, I don't necessarily think that I'm advocating a position where we don't talk about these things. I think what I'm advocating is a position where we could, I say we all the time, I don't know if you see yourself as a we, but I guess somewhat as a we, could gain much more power if we stop talking about the internet as something that is separate from real life, as something that is separate from society or something that is separate from democracy, but rather something that is heavily integrated already in real life. Being a victim of revenge porn is fucking real, man. To me, it wasn't anything I could close my computer or anything like that. And I think we could also gain much more power speaking that way. Because people still don't see it like that. So when we talk about tech versus democracy, I'm like, tech is democracy. The way we talk online and the infrastructure that the net has is democracy. And that dichotomy is different to get rid of, but I'm trying. Yeah, I don't know if it was an answer, but I don't know if you had a question either. But when I talk about democracy, I'm not talking about politics. Politicians are useless, sorry. I'm sorry, I've no time talking to them. I'm busy. Because when I talk about democracy, I'm talking about every single one of us. I'm talking about the way that we organize our lives and the way that we organize our everything from our homepages to our whatever. And I think that is where the internet actually has some revolutionary potential still, despite it being colonized by capitalism with violence. Yeah.
Trying to be able to block, stop, or report sharing
I think it's much more useful. I think it has a much more direct consequence on the lived experience for victims. I don't maybe necessarily want to start up that discussion now, even though that discussion is interesting, but a law like the EU Right to be Forgotten law, if that had existed when this happened to me, I would not have needed to stand up here. I could have gone on living my life pretty much as before, because it would have been very difficult to find ways to violate me. And I'm not standing here condoning that law in the way that it looks now. I just want you to be clear on that. But I think introducing ways online to protect individuals in the way that we are now protecting corporations is a good step. Like, for example, you probably know this, but on YouTube, if you attempt to upload a video that has a copyrighted sound bite on it, like any bite, like 10 seconds of a Drake song, you can't upload it. It scans the material before you upload it. And I'm having extreme difficulty understanding why we can't apply technology like this to things that have been confirmed as revenge or child pornography. I have extreme difficulty understanding why this is. And I think that this is also kind of about breaking the taboo and saying that some things maybe don't belong in the public sphere. That some things, after they've been leaked, maybe we should attempt to look at how we can use our tech brains to protect people from this. And the thing with anonymity is that we have a difficulty talking about what happens when that anonymity is taken away from you and what happens then. It is as if we kind of leave people in the dust after that has happened, and if you didn't manage to take care of your anonymity, too bad for you, man. We never remove stuff from the internet. Sometimes we even revel in the fact that things can't be removed from the internet with pride and joy. And that, as a person who cares about internet rights, can be pretty painful to see. And I'm going to have to say I'm much more optimistic about tech solutions than I am about political solutions. I'm pretty very hesitant about legal steps in this area. I think making it heavily illegal, like having really strict laws about revenge porn, for example, tends to often hit things that it shouldn't, as does all lawmaking that tries to do something good online, tends to be incredibly shoddily made, tends to not understand basic facts about how the internet works. But that is why I need people who are not politicians to help me. To help me solve this problem, because there is a problem. And the problem with revenge porn is similar to the problem with harassment, to the problem with hate speech, is that we have to have a discussion about what are we going to do, because it's not working as is. Do we let these people speak? Do we block them? Do we throw them out? Do we do we work it out culturally? Like, that's also one of the things I do, is that I talk about feminism, I talk about women's rights, and I talk about, maybe revenge porn wouldn't happen if if not so many people hated women. But they do. So now what? So yeah, I think the blocking tool is important. And I don't think the blocking tool limits free speech. Like, for me, the blocking tool is like me saying, I don't want to talk to you, you're an asshole. And that is extremely important, because I have people, sending me threats all day long, using my inbox for the vilest things. I need to have a tool for them to not be able to contact me. And I'm very aware of why the block is, as a principle, problematic. But as for how I'm living my life right now, I would not be able to talk about the things that I do in the places that I do if I weren't able to block people. And I think that this is also a consequence of the fact that we have a very leaderless, ideology-less movement, is that we have to be extremely strong on principle, right? Is that we have to have these really, really strong principles, and suddenly if someone starts saying, you know what, this principle is kind of getting in the way of my human rights, we have to get rid of them. Because we don't really have a full-fledged, well-functioning discussion about what happens when these problems arises, because we're afraid that the movement will disintegrate. And I think that is mostly the challenge that I feel like I'm working in, is that a lot of the things that has been posed as really hard principles has been also, like you said, a very strong part of what has made this so difficult. And that's a challenge, but it's not unovercomable, but it is if we're afraid to talk about it. And I think when I'm not obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian, for example, in the ways that a lot of other feminists are, but you have to be honest that she has some valid points about you have to be able to make a YouTube video without getting death threats and living underground. And the internet has been part of this, and we have to have a discussion about what we're going to do about that. And especially if we have this self-image of being the people who fight for the powerless and being the people who fight for those who have little in the face of those who have a lot, and fighting for those who don't decide everything in life, we should also take the side of people who suffer harassment, even though they're women. Although I understand it might be painful to some. One last question, maybe. Someone who hasn't asked a question? Yeah.
You said you're busy, all busy, and I think it would be great if you could ask me for consent in everything, but I don't have the time to manage that. So how do we handle the problem of consent at scale, or in my life and your life?
Shorter terms and agreements letters. I think it can be made easier. I think there are ways of course, I think it's very difficult to say, for every disease, can people know this and can people know that? But I think, like, for example, we have in Denmark consent forms for what organs do you want to donate when you die. I think that making forms like that and informing people in a way that makes them able to even answer such a form could be a big step forward. I think that in terms of, if I have to use an example, the Danish state, we already have a huge internet system, Borger.dk, which basically has all of our information on it. And I think making a clicker for all of that information, like living information, health information, stuff like that, clicking and saying, do I want people in huge databases to have access to this? Yes, yes, no, yes, yes, no, 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 yes. I think that would be a way to just basically, and while this is of course a more, logistical issue, I think that a lot of things could be made easier that way. Like, for example, yesterday I was called up, or I called to ask from my friend's cell phone, and my friend is pregnant, and the person on the other line from Københavns Kommune, Copenhagen municipality, they asked me, how's your pregnancy? Because she was sitting with a screen with her phone number on it, and they had her entire history, and they said, how's your pregnancy? And I was like, what? Yeah, I can see here that you're 4 months pregnant. I'm like, who are you? How do you know these things? I'm asking you a completely different thing. And I think stuff like that is stuff that we could talk about, and that could pretty easily be redeemed. But yeah, remind people why they need privacy in the first place. And it's not because they look like Guy Fawkes. I think we're done. I don't know. Do we have time?